7. Susano and Inara. The plumpest of my advisors waddled in a slow pace back and forth within the royal chambers, his hands shoved deep inside the pockets of his jerkin. Mairynne Evangale, clearly more vexed than the others by the temporary nature of my oath, prattled on about how inappropriate the entire thing had been, and how I should have discussed this with them beforehand. Careen stood near a far wall, and each time I made eye contact during Mairynne's monologue, she seemed to shrug in a manner that said she had advised as much. At my sister's side, Imarizel gave a few near imperceptible nods, punctuating certain points voiced by the advisor. Her hard green stare and folded arms told me she firmly disagreed with my actions that day. I pressed my fingers against my forehead and squeezed my eyes shut. My other advisors were also present and seated at the table in the royal common area. For a long time, not a one spoke in my favor or in my defense. I hadn't considered this moment, only the overwhelming drive inside me that told me this was the right path. Still, under such scrutiny, I held faith in the truth behind those feelings, and I waited for my advisors to work through their concerns. Solarine, at long last, interjected, "Oh, mine!" Then she waited for him to stop and look at her. Red-faced and eyes wide, he turned and snapped, "And now you'll come out of your haze to join us." I made to stand, an objection on my tongue, but Solarine held up a hand to forestall the chide I'd intended. In her gaze, I could feel all the weight of a winter's storm, and thanked the Triad she didn't focus her ire upon me. The temperature seemed to drop in the room as she said, "Evangale, you should be happy that your empress, Mairynne, has taken an oath that kept you as counselor. The fact that she spoke Mourwine's words leaves Tenyo Azarine's advisors in place by its very nature. Should she wish, she could write you off the council. So, I'd advise that you hold your tongue. She may be young, but she is your empress, and your dissent borders on insubordination." If possible, the red on Mairynne's face deepened. "Does no one else object? Lucas, Azarine." Lady Azarine Nightingale shifted forward in her seat, but she portrayed little emotion as she said, "In this decision, what I believe matters little. I sit on this council to advise the ruler of the Nantai people based on our laws, and what the Nightingale family holds ethical. Kogo Mairynne's decision does not violate any values. That she has found a way to satisfy our demands, but leave room for her father's return, is acceptable in my eyes, and the eyes of our written ways." Mairynne turned to his last hope for support. Lucas shook his head. "There's wisdom in Lady Azarine's words." After a pause, he added, "and in Lady Solarine's." I breathed a sigh, relieved that the majority of my council had accepted my oath, albeit reluctantly. However, my sigh had scarcely finished when the door flew open and Thalaja marched into the room. Before he had even reached the table, he spouted, "What were you thinking, Mairynne?" I popped out of my chair, regretting the words I would say, needed to say, before they gained voice. With my shoulders rolled back and chin lifted, I said, "Gensui Thalaja Northerngal, I have not requested your counsel in this matter, nor have I requested your presence at my table. The Royal Council is no place for a guard. When we have completed our business here, I'll speak with you. Until then, you will wait in the outer room." The few moments that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Thalaja's face fell, then he gathered it into an impassive mask, pressed his lips tight, and pivoted to leave the room. All I could do was hope that he understood how I couldn't have such a conversation in front of my storm sorcerer counselors. Since I'd just barely gained the majority's support, I couldn't risk showing leniency toward the way that he'd blown into the room. I searched every face in the room, ensuring that I'd adequately retained my position. It seemed I had. The last person I looked to was Careen, and she offered a smile and a single nod. With that, the matter seemed well handled, and after our reconnection the night before, I felt thrilled to have her support once again. Imarizel began. "Kogo Mairynne, may I speak freely?" She ran a hand over the black lace covering her one eye. Turning my gaze to her, I said, "Immediate family and their first advisors hold a place on the council. As my sister's first advisor, you are welcome to offer your thoughts on the matter." This I offered as tradition, and custom dictated as much, though I had no desire to hear her concern. "Very well," she started. "I will stop short of objecting to the vows you have sworn, but I fear that my people, the people of the Great Sands, may have issues with the nature of your oath. As I merely represent the Sandasgals, I feel it necessary to voice my concern." Her words were smooth and showed the respect that Mairynne Evangale had not, so I motioned for her to continue. "I would ask your leave to go to my people immediately and deliver this news in person. I believe their fear will drive continued unrest within the castes, but I'd like to confirm. If such an unrest were to escalate, it could lead to a struggle on many fronts. I think our biggest adversaries would be the Fireforgers or the Frostfighters, but I'd not count out the Cloud Courtiers either. Though they seem secure in their position of leading the High Cloud Court, would they pass on the opportunity to have a courtier rise to the station of Emperor or Empress?" Lucas reached for a goblet and added to Imarizel's suggestions. "What she says also carries merit, Kogo Mairynne." Mairynne flounced into a chair. Though tamed a bit, he added, "This unrest is what I'd warned of before. It is a danger that we should monitor heavily." Grabbing his empty goblet, he looked inside, then bellowed to the room, "Is there ale?" From where I stood, I had line of sight to everyone in the room. I clasped my hands and said, "Imarizel, thank you for your counsel. I grant you leave. You'll return to Stormskeep to provide an update once you've delivered the news?" "I will," she answered, tipping her head. I continued, "None of the concerns are of consequence to the nature of my vows to the Nantai people now. I have sworn my oath, and we must now turn toward managing the people to avoid such uprisings." "Might I make one suggestion, Kogo Mairynne?" Imarizel asked. "Of course. It might do you well to receive each of the nobles and ask that they hold the impermanence of your vows in confidence," she said. "That is sound advice," Lucas quickly and enthusiastically offered. "And it might go a long way in working to avoid the dethronement or attempts to usurp the Storm Sorcerer's hold on the highest caste, especially with the likes of the courtiers." Careen stepped forward. "I, for one, am proud of my sister. She showed a decisiveness that exists in few others. I believe she earned the throne today with her conviction and action. It will be smart to take measures to protect our station, but the result of the oath is the same. She is the Nantai Empress, and she has authority to rule the people as she sees fit. And should our father not return, she will rule until her death, when her successor takes her place." Solarine looked questioningly between Careen and me, clearly surprised at my sister's sudden show of support. Had it not been for the midnight stroll, I would have had similar questions in my mind. But this was the Careen I knew from before, and the sister I was happy to have returned. I spread my arms. "Counselors, you are all excused. Careen, please stay. Imarizel, would you ask the Laja to join us?" Obliging my wishes, everyone departed. To which destinations I didn't know, nor did that concern me much. I went to my sister. "Thank you for supporting me. It would seem that your council is coming around. Mairynne will be your greatest challenge. It will be a long time before he'll allow the matter to rest." I pulled the pins that held my hair, allowing it to fall about my shoulders. "Do you know where over Nantai we are at this moment? The last time I spoke with the navigators, we were traveling northwest over the Narrows, toward the Copper Coast. Is there somewhere specific you're concerned about?" Nothing specific. My eyes drifted closed, and I breathed deeply, expanding my lungs to allow the air to refresh my body. The Narrows was a strait far to the south. I'd been attempting to keep track of the route since our arrival, and found it strange that I could only vaguely sense the quick-paced travel while on the Cloud Island. Sometime tomorrow, we'd pass the Copper Coast and be near the Evernight Marshes. The door opened, drawing me out of my calculations. I opened my eyes just as Mairynne entered. My sister's advisor went to her side and whispered in her ear. Thalaja, on her tail, stopped just inside the room. My first guard stood with his feet at shoulder width, hands clasped behind his back, and his look betrayed no thought or feeling. Knowing I'd taken him down before, all I had now was hope that he'd see the reason behind my words and understand, or at least trust that my scold had been necessary. At a side table, I refilled my goblet with a sweet, sparkling wine. "I begin to wonder if this day will ever end," I said to the room, but looking at no one. "Though when Otar retires for the evening, the Halogalus require my presence at the Cloud Temple to begin a cleansing process only known to the gods and the clergy who represent them. Why don't we know more about what that entails?" Silence hovered in response to my question. At length, Mairynne answered. "Kogo Mairynne, it is a sacred rite. Outside of the people who complete the rite, only those trained as a Halogal are privileged enough in the eyes of the Triad to hold that knowledge." She'd said the obvious, what everyone had learned as younglings, but it didn't allay my exhaustion at these formalities. Well, I'd rather not go through these rites, and I don't relish the thought of the celebrations to follow. I gazed through the windows. Many hours remained before this would all begin, and I needed a distraction. "Tell me more about the search party and the plans to find Father." "Mairynne," started Careen, "we've already told you the extent—" "May I?" Mairynne interrupted, placing a hand on my sister's shoulder. When Careen nodded, her advisor continued. "Thalaja can convey anything you wish to know about that topic. And, given the tension before, I think it would be good for the two of you to talk. I would like to prepare for my journey to the Great Sands, and I'd like to confer with Careen before my departure." I folded my brow in confusion. "If we are truly over the Narrows, we are many leagues from your home. Wouldn't it be easier and quicker to wait for the High Cloud Court to make the full evolution? Then you'd be able to simply descend on a gale, rather than having to travel overland." "If the route of the Cloud Island were due north, that would be true, Kogo Mairynne. However, the plan is to travel north along the western coast of Nantai, then across the iced plains. By morning, we'll be passing over the Copper Coast, and it would be quicker to travel overland from there to my home." "Mairynne," Careen said, "I'd rather not attend the celebrations while you leave. Maybe I should go with you." The two exchanged looks, some unheard conversation carried on within their shared gaze. Instead of answering directly, Mairynne said, "I think you should be here for your sister, but we can discuss it further. Should we go?" Thalaja didn't move a muscle during this exchange. Careen turned to me. "Do you have further need of me today?" "No," I answered. "You may go. Thank you again for supporting me with the counselors." Before they turned to go, I caught a green flash in Mairynne's eye as she moved her gaze between my sister and me. Alone with Thalaja, I said, "Please, be at ease." I motioned to the wine and took a seat. Stiffly, Thalaja remained where he stood. "You requested my presence. What might I do for you, Kogo?" Though I regretted my necessary harshness before, I used it once again. "You may grab a glass of wine, water if you prefer, then sit with me and have a conversation." Softer, I added, "I don't wish to command you, Thalaja. It's just the two of us now. Can't we just talk?" He relented, pouring himself a goblet from the water pitcher, and sat across the table from the chair I'd taken. Formal expectations hovered in the air, and he would wait hours for me to break the silence. Sighing, I began. Before, my response to your demands emphasized our caste difference. I ran 2 fingers up and down the fat stem of the goblet, stroking the ridges of the pottery as I continued. Unfortunately, in this room, with my father's counselors, I had too much at stake to allow you to question my motives too. I paused, waiting for him to answer. His words came stiffly. Mairynne, I meant no disrespect, but I need to know why you took such an oath. This is one of my duties to the throne. He hesitated. But it also comes from my concern for you. Leaning forward, I extended a hand to him, but couldn't quite reach. To my relief, he met me partway, placing his hand in mine. Thalaja, I said, I welcome you to speak to me openly when we are alone. However, I can't afford to have anyone question your position in relation to their own. As Father taught me well, this is an unfortunate and necessary approach as ruler of the Nantai people. By our very nature, we position ourselves toward a higher caste, always seeking ways to gain the next level within our individual hierarchies. I ducked my head to secure eye contact. You are not like that, and I also believe differently. But Father always said that without order, the Nantai people would become lost. Then I truly don't understand why you took a temporary oath. At that, I stalled, took a drink of the sweet wine, looked around the room, then met his dark eyes forcefully. Quietly, but with emphasis, I said, I told you before that I intend to search for my father at your side. No, Mairynne, you can't go. Once you commune with Otar and Selene, you must remain in Stormskeep to rule the people. This ensures the order so told to you by Tenyo Azarine. Thalaja, yes, I can. And I will, I sighed. You can leave this part to me. In fact, I want to go to Umbra with you. I feel that the people would be more amicable to parting with their relic if I were to offer some diplomatic terms. They are, after all, Nantai people too. Thalaja shifted in his seat, straightened his spine, and inhaled sharply, an obvious objection working its way up his throat and struggling to gain voice. Holding up an index finger, I continued. But I understand that this is impossible right now. Such diplomacy will have to wait. He relaxed, if only by a small measure. I continued. But I think you should leave the courts and begin your journey into the Evernight Marshes while I tend to these cleansing rites and preside over the celebrations to follow. How can I ensure your safety here while I'm gone? You brought a team. I've been in no genuine danger here. Do you not trust your selected people to see me guarded? I trust the people I brought beyond doubt, but... I interrupted. There are too many people with eyes on me here. I will be fine. And I'd like you to return to Stormskeep as soon as possible, so we can understand how we can use this token from Umbra to find the Sinti and figure out what happened to my father. This waiting and politicking is eating me alive. Thalaja remained quiet, but his throat worked as he swallowed what he wanted to say. Tomorrow, we should be passing through the skies somewhere over the Copper Coast. That is not far from the Evernight Marshes. You should go then. Do you need help in calling a gale strong enough to lower you safely to the surface? Most likely. Thalaja lowered his eyes. As only half storm sorcerer, my storm magic is not as strong as yours or others, and the air is thinner up here. I'd assumed as much and said, You brought Rorine with you on this detail. Since you were going to take him on the journey, maybe you should take him tomorrow. I'll probably be in a bath somewhere in the temple, being useless. I huffed and reclined in my chair. Mairynne, that only leaves you with 2 guards. I gave him a hard stare. It worked to stop his objection, but he returned it with his dark eyes. In this silent exchange, A screech pealed through the space beneath the cloud island, shaking the very foundation of the royal chambers. Standing, I rushed to the door and out onto the balcony. As I was closer to the door, I reached the edge before my first guard, but Thalaja came quickly to my side. Beyond the railing and far below, the southernmost part of Nantai appeared as a narrow strip of land between two expansive blue seas, the Siren Sea to the west and the Manaka Sea to the east. "What was that?" I asked, my pulse thudding hard in my throat. "The same we heard at the falls?" Thalaja shook his head gravely, pushing in front of me protectively. "I wish I had an answer," he said, his eyes growing darker than usual, seeming concerned as he turned and ushered me back inside. "But it definitely sounds like something you shouldn't face until we know more." I pushed against him, struggling to see something over the balcony, anything that may have caused the ear-splitting noise. He wielded his lithe strength gently, but it was more than a match for me, and I soon found myself back inside and behind the glass. When he had secured the door, he turned and said, "I never discovered its source after that night by Stormskeep Falls." Before we could further discuss, counselors from every corner of the royal chambers moved quickly, steps fueled by fear, into the room. Everyone asked after the sound at once, and though I trembled with the same fear, I had the burden of addressing my people, even my leaders. I turned and moved deeper into the room, holding both hands high. "Counselors, please," I started. Carine placed her fingers in the corners of her mouth and whistled. When everyone looked at her, she motioned to me. "Thank you, sister." She dipped her head. "We mustn't panic. Certainly a bird of prey is hunting this night, and the sound is different here. There is naught for us to fear inside." Omine shook his head, his cheeks blubbering. "That was no bird. There was the same sound over Stormskeep a fortnight past." Carine cleared her throat and calmly moved to my side. "Kogo Mairynne speaks the truth. That sound is but a screech owl. It has been many years, but I heard it during my travels with mother and father." I smiled my thanks to her, not putting much faith in the explanation, but needing everyone to remain calm. "Return to your evening routines. All is well." As directed, they shuffled back into their individual rooms, murmuring all the while. Tasmine, priestess of Selene, had woven my hair into uncounted braids upon completion of the cleansing rituals, and my scalp felt drawn. The corners of my eyes slanted, my brows and forehead pulled taut. The acolytes assured me the tension would ease after a few days, a matter I felt grateful for as I'd wear them for a full cycle of the moon goddess, as tradition prescribed. "When Selene's full face shines over Nantai once again, you may release these bonds," Tasmine had said as she finished the work. My scalp throbbed as I sat on the dais in the high courtroom turned celebration hall. I leaned to my left and whispered to Carine, "Did Thalaja leave while I was at the temple?" "He did, along with his guard, Rorine. On what mission did you send them?" I shook my head. "Nothing of importance. He should be at Stormskeep by the time we return." My sister gazed upon me as if she wanted to question my motives further, but decided to either trust my judgment or simply allow it to rest. Instead, she said with a smile, "The braids are a lovely look for you, Mairynne." "You jest, Carine." I laughed off her praise. "No, I speak only in truth." Under the dimly lit orbs floating near the ceiling, the nobles and their retinues each wandered leisurely into the hall, gathering in small clusters and holding individual conversations. I envied their seemingly carefree vitality now that the time for formality had passed. We were there to celebrate the Nantai people ushering in a new era. Every caste wore their finest attire, and despite the veritable rainbow of colors, each set of tunics, dresses, or robes gleamed under orb light. The very attire my people wore bespoke a lightness in the air. Yet somehow, I couldn't join my people in their frivolity. Lifting a hand to the back of my head, I said, "If only they felt so lovely." I gave a small, sad laugh and dropped my hand. Karine and I both looked around the room, holding a silent conversation. It seemed that everyone present had someone, and that night we drifted together as the only two who missed another half. I made another effort to extend our banter. "Imarizel departed for the Great Sands?" Karine nodded. On my other side, and in her typical fashion, Yasmin cuddled up to Nestrine and engaged little with others, but they seemed enthralled by the gathering of all the casts around the center stage. The scene that awaited looked like a living mountaintop where a river sprang forth. Boulders and green grasses surrounded the spring. I'd never seen the legend of Sosano and Inara enacted by the Cloud Courtiers, but I marveled already at the illusions built into the set: a gently swaying tree, ever-running water, and blades of grass moving as if a wind swept through the room. A fine meal, a feast in truth, lay before me. Although, after 2 nights and 2 days of fasting, I had communed with the gods just before being led into the celebration hall. My appetite well sated with the sweet wine and sacred grains of the gods, I couldn't bring myself to partake. Nobles came forward at regular intervals to pay their respect and make conversation easily forgotten. String musicians on a balcony serenaded the guests as they finished their dinner and moved closer toward the hall's center for better views of the upcoming performance. I sipped warmed ruby wine and observed my people for what seemed an eternity, until they stopped arriving, stopped eating, and the din of conversation almost overshadowed the music. As I sat there, fighting exhaustion, the door opened and a herald entered, motioning to the percussionist who stood on a pedestal near the door. The courtier on the percussion stand, guised to be larger than the others and dressed only in simple kettle pants, nodded. He lifted a mallet and struck the bell. 1, 2, a dozen times, and the people encircled the stage, falling into silent anticipation. At all grand Nantai celebrations, the hosts arrange for the enactment of the most famous Nantai legend: the spirit Sosano, the blooming princess, and the regalia of Nantai. I had seen it a dozen or more times that I could recall, only once with a single cloud courtier amidst the troupe, but never with the combined talents of the illusionists. The orbs around the room dimmed as a narrator in long black robes and a black feathered mask moved around the stage, flourished arms toward the crowd, and sent glittering sparks to encircle the set. The sparks lifted to the heavens, revealing 3 people huddled on the mountaintop near the head of the river He. An old man comforted his wife, and a woman in the prime of her beauty stood brave-faced in a simple sheathed dress, wearing a string of bright, tooth-shaped jewels. As the narrator began, I found myself leaning forward and taking note of every minor element. The scene itself familiar, the details enabled by illusionary magic painted a more original experience than I could ever recall. When the old man cried, his tears glittered like diamonds trailing slowly down his cheek. When the old woman wailed, my chair shook with her sorrow. The black-robed narrator, double-timbred and harmonious, continued, "And Sosano, spirit of the storm, descended from the heavens above and went to the father. He asked the old man why he cried so, and the old man replied, 'The 8-forked serpent will soon come to devour our last daughter, Inara.'" The old woman wailed, and I felt her pain as my own. The actors mutely portrayed their characters before the Nantai nobles, and the crowd was as enraptured as I. The black-robed narrator danced around the mountaintop, driving the legend forward. Sosano replied, "If you will give me thy daughter, I will save her from the serpent, slay him, and honor your daughter for eternity." And so the old man and the old woman kneeled at the spirit's feet and begged for Sosano to make it so,
for their daughter to live. Thus, Susanoo took their daughter. With the magic of the storms, he called forth a great spinning wind that encircled Inara, and when it left, a blooming tree stood in her place beside the headwaters of the river He. Then Susanoo bade the old man and woman brew 8 tubs of sweet wine and place them in larger tubs of bitter milk spirits. He instructed the man and woman to place them in a circle around the tree of the blooming spirit and to hide in the surrounding trees and await the arrival of the 8-headed serpent.
My hand idly drifted to cover my mouth. Where before, this had all been mythos in my mind, I then connected the story with the cleansing ritual I'd just experienced. A rite in which I ceremoniously drank from 8 goblets and bathed in bitter milk baths. A pairing with this story bloomed in my chest that hadn't existed before, and I watched and listened with every fiber of my soul while the next scene unfolded.
When the serpent came, 8 sets of eyes glowed like the red of winter's cherry, and on its back firs and cypresses grew. But when it slithered to the headwaters of the river He, the sweet wine and bitter milk distracted the heads. Each head drank deeply and sank into drunken sleep. Whilst the serpent slept, Susanoo drew his 10-span sword and chopped the serpent into pieces. When he split the serpent's belly, he found the 8-span mirror of truth and laid it at the base of the blooming spirit that was Inara and continued about his work. When he came to the tail, the blade rang and came away notched. Susanoo dissected the tail to reveal a bright sword. He washed it in the river He and held it to the heavens. When he did this, clouds gathered above, opening with cleansing rain. The rain washed away the blood from the grasses and dissolved the serpent to fertilize the ground. Green, wet grass shone with small diamonds on each blade where Susanoo had slain the serpent, and he named the blade the Sword of Gathering Clouds. When the serpent had gone and the rain had cleared, Susanoo took the Sword of Gathering Clouds to the blooming spirit and turned her back into the woman, Inara. Thankful that he'd saved her from her sister's fates, she bestowed the tooth-shaped jewels upon him. Susanoo made Inara his wife in the early morning when Otar and Selene both gazed over the land. After they had married, he presented his gifts of thanks to the gods. To Otar, he gave the Sword of Gathering Clouds, to Selene, the 8-span mirror of truth, and to Atun, he presented the jewels. And so the Nantai treasures came to be, and the spirit of the storm, Susanoo, lived eternally at the headwaters of the river He, with his wife Inara, the blooming spirit. The scene at the center of the room fell into darkness, and the orbs illuminated the awestruck audience. When the center came back into the light, the actors and set alike had vanished. Gasps went up around the room. Silently and still, I remained. I'd never known how closely the legend of Susanoo and Inara was linked to the emperor's or empress's regalia and our rituals, and I felt simultaneously proud to be Nantai Empress and heavy in the chest. Whether it had been the illusionary talents of the cloud courtiers or the reality of my ascension and cleansing, I couldn't be certain. But this enactment of the well-known legend rang so poignantly that a tear leaked from one eye as the actors returned and bowed to the audience. The percussionist's mallet struck a shield, sending a long, singular ring through the room and marking the end. Applause erupted. The black-robed narrator came and bowed low at my feet, the feathers of his mask brushing along my skirts. Silently then, the courtier stood and looked me in the eyes.
The gray of his irises and the surrounding glittering white set into a coal-black skin within the even blacker mask, setting me on edge. A chill ran from my neck to my tailbone as the narrator turned away and retreated. I longed for Thalaja.